Room 13 was a shadowy secret in St. Michael's Hospital, a place that seemed almost like a living rumor, spoken about in hushed tones and half warnings. None of the night staff ever mentioned it aloud, but everyone seemed to feel it, an undercurrent of something ominous lurking at the end of the long hallway, like a chill that ran up your spine when you passed by. Nurses, doctors, janitors alike, they all knew that Room 13 was a place better left alone, avoided, left in its own darkness. But tonight, something had changed, and Alex Ramos, the hospital's newest night nurse, would be drawn toward the forbidden room, toward the horror waiting within. The night was quiet, with only the hum of fluorescent lights and the faint beeps of medical monitors filling the air as Alex walked down the empty hallways. He was only 2 weeks into his position on the night shift, but already he had heard enough rumors to keep him glancing over his shoulder. St. Michael's paid handsomely for the graveyard shift, something most hospitals didn't do, and now he was beginning to understand why. There was an unspoken dread that hung over this place like a storm cloud. Tonight, the halls seemed darker, the shadows longer, and as the clock neared midnight, Alex couldn't shake the sensation that something was watching him, following him. He continued his rounds, trying to ignore the prickling unease that crawled over his skin, but as he passed by the doors leading to the restricted wing, his curiosity got the best of him. It was almost as if Room 13 was pulling him closer, drawing him in with an unseen force. He stopped just outside the door, feeling his hand drift almost unconsciously toward the doorknob. A message on his phone suddenly caught his attention. It was from Kayla, his girlfriend, who had jokingly teased him about the hospital's creepy reputation earlier that night. Her text read, "Hope you're surviving that spooky place. Miss you already, love you." Alex smiled, feeling a momentary calm, and texted back quickly, "Miss you too. Wish me luck with the ghosts." As he slipped his phone back into his pocket, he turned once more to the door. Something about tonight felt different, as if Room 13 was waiting for him, expecting him. Against every ounce of reason, he took a deep breath and pushed open the door. Inside, the air was thick, almost suffocating, and a chill seeped into his skin. He scanned the dim room, expecting it to be empty, but a figure lay in the bed, a patient, unmoving and pale, as if frozen in time. The dim light from the hallway barely illuminated his form, casting a strange, eerie glow over him. As Alex approached, his flashlight caught the outline of the figure's gaunt face, and he froze. The patient was thin, skeletal even, his skin a sickly shade of gray that seemed to absorb the dim light. Dark shadows under his eyes made them appear sunken, hollow, like they hadn't seen the light in years. Though the figure lay still, Alex felt a pair of invisible eyes fixed on him, watching him. A shiver ran down his spine as he forced himself closer, drawn by a morbid curiosity he couldn't quite explain. As he stepped toward the bed, the air turned colder, like he had stepped into a freezer, and he could see his own breath fogging in front of him. His instincts screamed for him to leave, to turn around and pretend he'd never been there, but his legs felt frozen in place. Heart pounding, he swallowed hard, trying to gather his nerve. Suddenly, the figure on the bed moved, a slow, almost mechanical turn of the head until his hollow eyes locked onto Alex's. They were empty, devoid of any humanity or life, yet they held an unnatural awareness. His mouth opened, and though no sound escaped, Alex felt the words form in his mind as clearly as if he had heard them aloud. "Help me escape this place." The voice in his mind was weak but desperate, a plea laced with an unspoken terror. Alex took a step back, his pulse racing. The figure's arm lifted slowly, almost as if it was struggling against an invisible weight, and pointed toward a small drawer beside the bed. Alex, feeling as though he were in a dream or perhaps a nightmare, approached the drawer, his hands trembling as he pulled it open. Inside was an old, yellowed file, its pages brittle and worn. The name Thomas Grayson was scrawled in faded ink across the top, along with a note that read, "Patient admitted after severe trauma, prognosis irreversible. Do not resuscitate." His eyes scanned further down, and his stomach turned as he read on. Thomas had been admitted after a car accident decades ago, left in a coma, unresponsive, until he had simply disappeared from the hospital's records. As he read, he heard a faint shuffling sound behind him, like bare feet against the linoleum floor. Slowly, he turned, his blood running cold. Thomas was no longer in the bed. Instead, he stood mere inches from Alex, his expression hollow yet filled with a torment that seemed beyond human understanding. His skeletal hand reached out, brushing against Alex's arm, and the touch was like ice, spreading through him until he could feel it chilling his very soul. "Help me," the voice echoed in Alex's mind again, more insistent this time. "We are trapped here, held by him. He will never let us leave." A wave of nausea hit Alex as he began to understand. Thomas and perhaps others were held here not by any natural means, but by something far darker. His thoughts drifted to the whispers he'd heard among the staff, the strange rumors of Dr. Harold Blake, a doctor obsessed with death and the afterlife, who had vanished from St. Michael's years ago under mysterious circumstances. Alex's grip tightened on the file. He was beginning to piece together the horrible truth. Dr. Blake had been rumored to experiment on patients, especially those on the brink of death, seeking some kind of forbidden knowledge. Some had said he'd wanted to unlock the secret to binding souls to this plane, to keep them from passing on. It had always seemed like an urban legend, but now, faced with the tortured ghost of Thomas Grayson, Alex could feel the horrifying reality of it sinking in. As the clock struck midnight, the hospital shifted. The walls seemed to close in, pulsing with an unnatural energy, and Alex could feel the air growing thicker, pressing down on him. Shadows twisted and contorted along the walls, forming shapes, faces other patients who had been trapped here. Their souls bound to the walls of room 13, each one staring at him with hollow eyes filled with agony and despair. Their faces seemed to beg for release, their silent cries a haunting echo in the cold air. Thomas stepped back, his figure blending into the shadows, leaving Alex alone. Or so he thought. A sudden, soft moan filled the room, and the shadows began to move again, forming shapes, bodies, faces. Each figure bore a look of torment, each one reaching out as if begging for help. Alex's mind raced. He couldn't leave them here, bound to this place, but he didn't know how to free them. As he scanned the room, his eyes fell on an old medical book on the shelf. The title was barely legible, but the symbol on the cover, a broken hourglass surrounded by twisted vines, hinted at something ancient, something dark. He grabbed the book, flipping through its pages, his hands shaking as he read fragments of notes left by Dr. Blake. The doctor's words were twisted, filled with an obsession for control over life and death, a desire to master both. A passage caught his eye, a ritual, one that could break the bonds holding souls to this plane. But it required a terrible price, the blood of the living. The hospital seemed to groan around him as he took in what he needed to do. Shadows loomed closer, the spirits of the trapped patients watching him, waiting. He held out his hand, a feeling of dread washing over him as he made a small cut on his palm. As his blood dripped onto the floor, the air shifted, thickening with an unnatural silence. Suddenly, a scream echoed through the room, a scream that seemed to come from the very walls themselves. The shadows writhed, faces contorting in pain as the dark energy binding them began to release. One by one, the figures vanished, their expressions softening into something close to peace. Only Thomas remained, his hollow eyes filled with gratitude. The room began to brighten, the cold dissipating, and with a final, silent look of thanks, Thomas's figure faded away, leaving Alex standing alone in the empty room. Stumbling out of room 13, Alex knew he could never return to St. Michael's. He handed in his resignation, never looking back, but even after leaving, he could still feel the cold touch of Thomas's hand on his arm, a reminder of the dark secrets that room held. And though room 13 now stood empty, sealed off by the hospital board, some say that if you pass by late at night, you can still hear faint whispers, as if something is still there, waiting, trapped forever in the shadows. If you enjoyed this haunting tale, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And keep an eye on your toys tonight. They just might be listening.